Okay, we are live. For those of you who just got the notification that we are going live with this GA4 for WordPress webinar, welcome. It looks like we do have a few folks that are trickling in here. Welcome. We're going to start here in just a couple of minutes to let everyone get settled. I know we have a lot of folks who are logging in from all over the globe, but we would love to know where you are logging in from. If you can add to the comments, what country, what time. Oh, we got a wave here. Yeah, let us know where you're logging in from. It would be great to hear. And then yeah, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes. We got Colorado. All right, California. So far all stateside. Not bad.
Except for heaven.
Yeah, we got almost heaven.
Although
Not
maybe
sure where
that's
that
in
is.
the
Oh, we got
US.
the UK. We got Baltimore. All right, well, welcome you guys. Up Atlanta. We got London. I love it. Okay, so we're gonna give it just another about a minute or so. Senegal. All right, Alberta, Canada. This is Bulgaria. Man, this is an international webinar already. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put everyone on screen so you can see our lovely faces. And here we are. So I'm going to unmute everyone. Oh, let's make sure we can hear you guys.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Okay, we got John, Jeremy, Justin, Steve. Okay, we could all hear. Oh, okay, we got some technical, just still ironing it all out with the muting. But welcome to everyone. We're going to go ahead and kick it off here, but I wanted to do just a quick introduction. So we've got, here are our lovely speakers, and we're going to start it out going in the order that we have everyone on the screen. So John, can you tell us who you're with and what you do at WooRank?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it. John Murcott. I run products and strategy. But for this call, my claim to fame is I was a solutions engineer at WordPress VIP. So WordPress VIP is the enterprise arm of Automatic, mainly around hosting and infrastructure. Automatic is the parent company of WordPress. So I spent a lot of time on large-scale enterprise WordPress deployments. So thank you for your time today. Looking forward to the conversation.
I love it. And Jeremy, you're up.
All right. Hi, everybody. Jeremy LaDuque, and I head up product marketing for WooRank, as well as some of our other products with our parent company, Bridgeline. So here today, I'll be able to talk about GA4 from more of an SEO standpoint, since WooRank is an SEO tool. So happy to be here. Thanks, everybody, for being here with us.
Wonderful. Welcome. And Justin.
Awesome. Thanks, Victoria. Hey, everybody. My name is Justin Seibert. I am the president of Direct Online Marketing. We are a top 3% Google Premier partner, and we help clients from all over the world sell to over 150 countries around the globe.
Fantastic. And Steve, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. My name is Steve D'Angelo. I'm a senior analyst here at DOM. I work a lot with conversion tracking, and recently huge emphasis, obviously, on implementing GA4 for businesses and ensuring that you get the most out of your analytics implementations.
I love it. We're thrilled that you're joining us. All right, so we're going to kick it off here. I'm going to pass this over to Jeremy. So I'm going to just do some reordering here. And then, yeah, we'll get right into it.
Awesome. Thanks, Victoria. And thanks you guys for being here. I think this is going to be a great session. I'm looking forward to it. So I think I can really help frame the next 55 minutes up, perhaps 45 minutes of talking, and then we'll leave some good amount of time for some Q&A at the end. In fact, Victoria did a great job of already pinging everybody ahead of time for some questions. So if we could go to the next slide. I think a good frame up for this is I'm just going to spend a few minutes here as to what are we doing, what is GA4 at a high level, and why did Google do this? And I think that'll be a great start to then allowing Justin and Steve to kind of step in and take it to a deeper level. And then we'll wrap up with John talking about, how does all this apply within a major CMS like WordPress. So let's just jump in. I'm sure everybody's heard about GA4, but it was very interesting. We did a webinar just a few weeks back, and we did a survey of who was actually on GA4 and who was still on Universal, which is the existing. And 70% of folks were still on Universal. So that was pretty surprising. I know we didn't queue up a survey here, but I would venture to guess a lot of folks are still on Universal and waiting to actually pull the trigger on GA4. And I think you're going to learn a lot today about why you'd want to do that pretty quickly. So let's start. I love this slide on the evolution of why we're here today with GA4, and it's because we started, Universal dates back to 2005, right? So there's so many things about Universal that really kind of put us decades old. And so GA4 really is, when you dig into it, just a phenomenal new product from Google, and really kind of puts us in a better place, especially looking forward. So I don't know if everybody here remembers Urchin, but back in 2005, Google actually acquired Urchin. And the funny thing is UTM actually stands for Urchin Tracking Module, I think. So that's what it dates back to. And then we started getting into the classic analytics, and then into UA. But then Google had to start figuring out, how do we start tracking for apps? And then they introduced Firebase. And now here we are with GA4, and GA4 really fundamentally shifts everything. It's a brand new platform, right? This is not an upgrade. This is not a migration. And I know Justin and Steve, you guys are going to get into that a bit, but this is not there's no migration path of your data. So we really need to make sure you understand, this is a complete new application that you need to fire up, and it needs to start tracking data on your website. So, and the other thing is, it also addresses several key things, like a lot of privacy issues that are going on. GA4 kind of calls this a privacy safe, new analytics package, right? That ensures customer insights are not coming from cookies moving forward, because we're going to be in a cookieless world. So it definitely deals with privacy issues. And it also, just the foundation of GA4, the data model itself, really sets Google up to start introducing more and more AI and machine learning. And I think one of the nice things is there's predictive AI insights already in GA4, which is really neat to see. And we'll be talking about that a little bit as well. So let's go to the next slide and just also frame up the other aspect of this, right? Which is GA4 is great and it gives me these great insights, but aren't I here to understand, how do I make my website better, right? How do I make sure I'm showing up? And so that's all SEO, right? That's all search engine optimization. But I do want to make sure we understand GA4 is not a ranking algorithm change, right? You're not going to go, change keyword density or the H1 tags on your websites just because you're moving to GA4. What it does do, though, is it's certainly going to help you understand your audience better. With what GA4 is introducing, and it moves, way beyond just page views and sessions into the whole customer journey. It gives you a much deeper level of granularity. So it's going to help you understand your audience, which is going to help you understand your search engine optimization. But I do want to make sure everybody here understands GA4 itself, right, is not something that actually, it's not one of Google's, major algorithm changes. Like, as an example, like Core Web Vitals. Core Web Vitals is something Google came out with and Google said, look, the customer experience is really important, and we're going to come out with these metrics, these new metrics called Core Web Vitals, because we're going to start tracking these things. That's something that actually impacts your rankings, and you have to go and you have to understand Core Web Vitals. And to me, GA4 allows you to understand that customer and their behavior on the site. And to me, like when we look at that on the last slide, when we look at that progression of how Google got to GA4, you could almost drop Core Web Vitals in there in that timeline to say that was a real learning experience for Google to come out and realize we have to start tracking the user experience, and we're going to do that through Core Web Vitals. Now we're going to move to GA4. So it's really kind of it puts a spotlight on Core Web Vitals as another aspect that if you're not really up on Core Web Vitals right now, this would be a perfect time to really dig into Core Web Vitals as well as GA4, because the two combined are really going to help you get to that deeper level of understanding of your audience. So with that, that's just, again, high level. Why are we doing this? How did Google get to this point? Why are we here? Let's move on to Justin and talk about the deeper level here.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate your setting everything up there. In layering on what Jeremy was talking about, as I think you all know, Google is forcing everyone into GA4. You don't have a choice. And we're finding a lot of people fall on two ends of the extreme. And so one end, we have some early adopters that are really excited about GA4 has to offer, and they want to dig in. And then some other folks that are really dragging their feet. And at both ends of the extreme, we're seeing people skip over critical steps in the planning process. And so because GA4 doesn't come out of the box neatly and nicely like Universal Analytics did, and because it won't retroactively pick up data, you really need to think out your measurement strategy in the beginning. And otherwise, you're going to run an implementation and you're not going to capture all of the insights that you need. So instead of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and trying to recreate exactly what you had in your Universal Analytics setup, we really, in the strongest way, suggest that you're going to take this as an opportunity to redefine your analytics by asking, how can we customize GA4 specifically for our business needs? And regardless of how you're going to decide to implement GA4, always start with your measurement strategy. And there's really three pieces to this. The first piece is identifying your business goals. Gather your key stakeholders, align on the overarching goals of your business, and really big on getting as many people involved in the stage as possible, just because we see invariably that people have different thoughts, and we want to capture all these up front. And then second, you want to identify your website goals and think of those goals as the specific objectives or tactics that you want to use to reach those overarching business goals. So if you're in a demand gen situation, really things like, how do I get more requests for information form submissions or gated content downloads? Any ways you can collect information. And these two things, that website goal and business goals, they have to work in tandem. And then finally, defining your KPIs. So what are all those intermediary data points that you want to measure, and what are those processes you can tweak to improve the results? It's really important to measure the full journey. So then the next thing we look at is your tag implementation plan. And we are sharing here an example of one, very stripped down. And just be aware that if you're going to use a WordPress plugin, instead of using Google Tag Manager to implement GA4, you could do this step. I don't think it's totally necessary. It's really not necessarily, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But if you're going to implement via GTM, Google Tag Manager, which is what we would recommend in most situations, the tag implementation plan is extremely valuable because GTM is going to give you the ability to customize your implementation. So this is the step to make sure you've thought through everything so that you can collect all of the data that you might want later. Because again, it's not going to come out of the box and it's not going to retroactively pick up data that you're not specifically testing for. So then if we think about GA4 configuration settings, this that you're looking at right now, the screenshot, is a pretty basic setup, and you can add certain features such as setting additional fields, which you can use for tracking user IDs, or you can set up user properties. Right now, it's set to fire on all page loads, and essentially it serves as an event listener for GA4's automatic events and enhanced measurement events. So now by default, GA4's data retention is just the last 2 months. So these settings apply to the exploration reports. And since the standard aggregated GA4 reports currently leave a lot to be desired, and that is putting it very kindly, analysts and more technical marketers often want to rely on the exploration reports, which, if you're used to universal analytics, that's very similar to the custom reports there. So using those to pull snapshots. But if you just have this data, if you have this basic setup and you haven't tweaked any settings, you're only going to get those 2 months. So you're really out of luck to pull over any kind of year-over-year data. It will let you go back all the way to 14 months. So that is what we would recommend for everybody, that you extend back to that time frame. All right. And then if we think about enhanced measurement, and enhanced, I always think of Barry Bonds. And if you're not a baseball fan, and you come from Pittsburgh, which is where we're from, you remember the Barry Bonds that look like this on the left. And then he ate a whole bunch of steroids and ballooned up to this Barry Bonds that everybody remembers chasing the home record on the right. And if that sounds like I'm a bitter Pirates fan that he left, that's 100% the case. So if we think about what we need for enhanced measurements, we've already identified which down funnel events are valuable enough to actually be tracked. So we still have to tell GA4 what those things are. Purchase events are going to go ahead and be marked as conversions by default, so that's good. But every other event must be manually marked as a conversion in the GA4 interface. So that's going to allow you to do a few different things. Number one, you can report on conversions. So see the actions that actually matter most to your business using the acquisition engagement and the advertising reports. You can also bid on conversions. So Google Analytics 4 works really great with Google Ads. So we can import that conversion data into our ads account to fuel our bidding strategies. We can also attribute credit to conversions. So we can combine data with data from other advertising sources and put those together to get a fuller picture of their contribution to our funnel. And then finally, we can advertise to unconverted users. So it's a kind of neat play on retargeting, where we can, again, leverage this from a GA4 perspective. And then finally, we want to think about event parameters. And so just like Thor's the strongest Avenger, parameters are the most powerful feature of GA4's event-based model. And if you are a huge Marvel nerd like I am, you might be a stickler and say that technically the computer said that Hulk was the strongest Avenger. But if Chris Hemsworth can look like this without any CGI, he gets strongest Avenger in my book. Either way, definitely stronger than Barry Bonds. So going back to parameters, these are additional pieces of metadata that add context to each event. So whereas in Universal Analytics, we only had event category, event action, and event label to actually provide this additional event information, we can now set up to 25 separate event parameters per event, and that gives us a total limit of 50 per property. So we can collect a huge amount of information now. If we think about submission events, we can collect things like the type of form builder that was used, the form ID, the form offer, and a lot more beyond that. And we can even categorize the forms depending on the part of the funnel that the users are in. In terms of custom dimensions, it's important to understand that you can leverage this additional information captured in these event parameters in your reporting. And if you want to use an event parameter in GA4 standard reports or in their exploratory reports or reporting generated within the API from GA4, then you have to register that event parameter as a custom dimension in the GA4 interface. So don't miss that step at all. So thanks for listening. Look forward to hearing more of the questions, and I will now turn it over to John.
Victoria? I don't hear.
Unmuted.
Oh, okay. But you can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you. And I did want to quickly mention there were some folks who were asking how can they get all of this information. We will be sending out the recording and all of the really helpful resources that Justin, Jeremy, and now John will be going through. We'll be sending all of that out via email. So thanks to those who had that question. So John, I'm going to pass it on over to you.
Great. And great pictures there, Justin. That was terrific. So I have a couple graphics. They're not as powerful as Thor, but hopefully they'll be helpful. And it does not include the next one. So if you go to the next one, Victoria, this is a little bit of Captain Obvious here. But I thought I would just highlight a couple of things. Now we're going to get a little more specifically into WordPress itself. And it's not surprising that the evolution of the web, and of course, the way that we were just learning about how Google Analytics is addressing the way the web has changed. Obviously, people on multiple devices, more and more mobile apps, et cetera, that you'd want to capture that and present it in one nice combined analytics. But WordPress has been going in this direction too, but probably, well, I can tell you from the WordPress VIP days, most people don't know exactly how far it's evolved to support this. And one of the stats we used to use at VIP is 43% of the web, at least when I was working there, of websites on the internet are built on WordPress. So it's pretty significant. But as you head further to the right in this evolution, especially on the phone, sometimes people scratch their heads and say, yeah, but WordPress isn't good on a mobile app. Of course, the themes that WordPress comes with typically work very nicely in a responsive framework, but that's just web, that's mobile web, not the app. But the interesting thing is the biggest customer at VIP, weather.com, and as I wanted to add a comment myself as we were going around where people are from, but I guess the presenters can't comment. Anyway, I'm in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and I'm checking weather.com and the weather apps constantly trying to see, like, is there any snow on the mountain? Is it going to snow at all? And the interesting thing is they do include on the app, which of course is mainly driven around weather information, obviously, but they make, or at one point made 80 million API requests to WordPress to include articles, posts, other updates around weather events, or just other relevant information when you're on the app. So WordPress is evolving to run on these platforms in the same way that you'd want to leverage GA4 to have one interface that pulls in the analytics across all these devices that you can through a RESTful API call, which is the way most of these mobile apps are pulling in WordPress content, works quite nicely. Now, there's one other thing too, because probably most of you know who are familiar with WordPress, there is also a multi-site framework to WordPress. And in many cases, newer developers coming out of school, coming out of different companies don't necessarily or don't always want to build sites using themes, right? The classic PHP-based framework that WordPress uses. And once again, you want to be able to capture all this activity and perhaps leverage your WordPress content on these sites. A lot of customers use GraphQL. This gets a little technical here, but if you're building a Node.js application, something using Next.js or React or a JavaScript-based framework, we get a lot of customers that would just call a GraphQL endpoint and then use that, just take the JSON that's returned and build out the app. So, but the point I'm trying to say here is you may be surprised, for people who don't know, how much you can leverage your WordPress implementation across these environments. So you get the best of both worlds. GA4 is showing you the results across these devices, and you can include the same WordPress content. And by the way, from that GraphQL standpoint, the endpoint is also per site. So you could still be running your, let's say, first site on WordPress, build a new site using the multi-site framework. That one could be decoupled, or headless is the term some people will use. And that would be on the Node.js application. So just some options there. Victoria, if you could go to the next slide here. So one other aspect, I'm sure people who are familiar with WordPress or know about the evolution of the block editors. Elementor was always very popular. Bakery Builder was something that I used a lot. And now they're at Gutenberg. And I just thought this was an interesting way to try to understand where Google is going from the UA framework to the GA4 framework, because on the left, for people who knew WordPress back in the day, like myself, It was, you had a WYSIWYG editor, you wrote your blog or you created your page, and that just made sense. Like when Justin was talking about all of those, 25 parameters, which is pretty amazing around events. Back in the day, it was just a page. Just had a page. I know it was clicked. Maybe someone bounced off it or came to it or whatever. And that was just the world that Google lived in, the analytics world lived in, but it was also the world that WordPress lived in. And now, as these experiences are becoming a lot more fluid, a lot more advanced, you can take advantage of the Gutenberg block editor, where essentially the quote unquote page is a collection of blocks. And those blocks can be pretty sophisticated and they have all different integrations, whatever it may be. And you could arrange and adjust those blocks in a very compelling way. So it's just interesting to see that now, rather than just think of a page in WordPress, I'm thinking of a collection of blocks, and then going back to all of the events that GA4 can capture. You're essentially just saying, yeah, each one of my blocks represents an event. And now I'm going to throw out a product idea, which maybe someone already did, and I should have checked, but it came to me as Justin was going through his presentation, that it would be such a great plugin. And by the way, Gutenberg supports plugins just the way general theme or WordPress itself supports plugins. So you can have plugins for specific types of blocks. It would just be great if it just said, like, which events would you like to track from GA4 in this block, not on the page, but in the block. Anyway, could be interesting there. If you go to the next one, Victoria. So this one, now I'm trying to get up a little bit against Justin. This is a slightly different picture from Thor, taking a Zen-like approach. But it goes, once again, a little bit to what I was saying before. When I grew up in WordPress back in the day, it really was all about like the path. Like the perfect path was someone comes to the homepage, then they go to the About Us page, and then they go to the Contact Us page. It was like so perfect. And like, oh, we just want to follow that path. It's so great. And hopefully leads to a lead and it gets into your system and sales follows up. But now really that journey, I love this concept. It's like all these pages have different events that are associated with discovery, and then confirming, what you're researching there, and then hopefully in the end, engaging with the company. So I just love this idea that you're really taking a step back and just understanding this is what a journey looks like. There's going to be multiple events throughout that journey. And I really think for people who are considering Gutenberg, if you haven't tried it or looked at it, that is a really interesting way to kind of take that step back also and think of your site more as a series of blocks, so to speak, in these digital experiences, as opposed to a collection of pages, which is really the old UA model. Great. And next, Victoria. So this is just something to highlight here. Totally understand where Justin was coming from. It's like, look, use Google Tag Manager. I know people who are familiar with WordPress totally understand that WordPress has multiple ways that you can be capturing the tags for Google and present them. Just one thing to consider, since the plugin framework for WordPress is so powerful, and for people who don't need the sophistication that someone like Justin and the DOM team would use, there are nice tools inside of WordPress that do highlight, and I'm highlighting Monster Insights. It's one of the more popular ones. The interface inside of WordPress is less compelling because obviously it's not showing you everything. But what's interesting about it is it lets you track both of the tags at the same time. And all the points that Jeremy and Justin were saying is don't forget, it's going away. The old tags aren't going to work anymore. You're not going to get the data. You can kind of relax a little bit if you capture both from, in this case, with Monster Insights, because it'll automatically be tracking both. And of course, when the UA stuff no longer works, you'll just be seeing the data coming from GA4. And what's nice about it is nothing's going to change. You're just still using the same interface, admittedly watered down. So maybe this is just for some folks on your team to interact with, but it could be pretty compelling. Now, when I say it's not going to change, guess what? It is going to change a little bit, because things like bounce rates, aren't going to be there. So look, some things aren't going to be in the standard screen, so to speak, inside of WordPress, but it's kind of an interesting way to look at the world. Let's just track both at the same time. Let the plugin handle the transition when it happens, and it could be less jarring to some of your users, not the hardcore users, but the lightweight, just kind of want to get a basic idea of what's going on in the site. It's just an interesting approach. And then the last one here. So this is me going right up against Justin. We'll see what people think. But once again, not as good as Thor and Barry Bonds. I know all about, remember all about that story there. But this was a fun one. Just like, how could I visualize, don't worry about bounce rates anymore and think more about engagement? And there's a little bit of a shameless plug in the next slide here, but this is kind of fun because, oh, not yet, Victoria, just super quick. Because this used to be the world that, believe it or not, before all the GA4 stuff really was coming out, that I was talking about a WordPress VIP, because WordPress VIP had acquired a company called Parsley, just another analytics tool. And the whole point is like, don't think about bounce rates, think about engagement. And one of the things that was always tricky to understand true engagement, like how do you know someone is literally looking at the content that you spent all this time in WordPress creating, putting through workflow, deploying, etc., when a lot of times before it's like, well, you had the tab open, then you went to another tab, and Google back in the day still thought you were on the page. So, you had like, well, how long are people on the page and that type of thing. And you didn't really know. It wasn't that accurate. And like I said, most people were just thinking about, well, what's the bounce rate? And the whole point that Parsley would say is, don't worry about the bounce rate, focus on engagement. Now, the good news is now GA4 is more sophisticated around its understanding of engagement and what are you doing on the site? How much time are you actually on the page, as opposed to you opened the tab and then went off to read your email, and Google didn't really recognize that you're no longer actually engaged with the content. And then the final thing now, Victoria, if you would go, and this is a shameless plug, doesn't benefit me anymore. Obviously, I'm in the Bridgeline and WooRank world, but it's just a tool to consider, because, one thing you may feel, and I know both Jeremy and Justin brought this up, is like, yeah, I kind of feel like Google just made this change and now I can't get that data anymore. It's not the worst thing in the world to spread your risk a little bit. Maybe we should use a couple of different tools here, and maybe consider a tool, especially if you're a WordPress person, that's more content aligned. Now, not taking away anything from the events and all the other wonderful things that you can do on your website, but one of the reasons why VIP bought Parsley is that it's a very content-centric analytics tool, which means it cares more about who wrote it, like, the author inside the tool. How long is it? What are the tags? It also has some AI built in for their own tagging, smart tags, they call it. So it's very content centric. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, especially with GA4, it blows it away. But it gives you those kind of two strengths. Number one, it's content oriented and not necessarily like a website oriented, although of course your content's on a website. And it spreads the risk. Like, why not look at another tool? It's a little more expensive, but it could be something to consider. So that's it. Thanks for your time.
Okay, so we are all hopping back on here, and we are going to start talking through the questions that everyone submitted. Oh, where's Jeremy? There he is. All right. Just going to unmute a few folks here. And okay, I think Justin and Steve, I might have, there we go. Can we hear you? There we are. All right. Everyone's here. Perfect. So we're going to go through a lot of really great questions got submitted in the registration process. So we're just going to flip through just a couple of these. As we're talking, if anyone listening to the webinar right now has a question, by all means, please put it in the comments. If we have time to address it, that would be amazing. We definitely will. If not, the recap blog that we will be emailing out will also be a perfect chance to address it. So don't, be dismayed if we don't have a chance to talk through your questions. So first up, all right, can we talk a little bit about goal tracking? So I know you guys did cover this a little bit in your earlier talk, but do you want to get into the weeds a little bit here as well? And this is open question for all speakers.
Sure. So I'm happy to take this one. The first thing with goal tracking, and this is something I still fall into a lot, I keep saying goals when they're technically now considered conversions in GA4, which, I mean, I'm still calling Microsoft ads Bing ads, so I'm sure I will turn that switch in my head eventually. But a couple things to think about with goals / conversion tracking within GA4. The first one is a big one that Justin touched on previously. I see a lot of times in implementations where they're sending the event data through, and we'll use generate lead for an example, but they didn't actually go and designate it in the GA4 UI as a conversion. So while you're going to have the event tracking data there, you're still not able to optimize and use all the advantages of a conversion. So that's probably one of the biggest call outs. Another is we're all pretty familiar within UA having the 20 goal limit within there. That's been expanded a little bit for GA4. You can have up to 30 conversions for a property, which is awesome. But a lot of these limits, as we've kind of seen with UA, 20 goals did not go very far for properties for a lot of implementations. So a big thing here is understanding, and this goes back again to the tag implementation plan and the measurement strategy, actually unifying your goals and having everything bubble up. So if we were to use that generate lead event, for example, let's just say that we have a request a demo form on the site, a contact us form on the site, and a gated white paper download on the site. A lot of times what we'll see is people will set up those as 3 separate goals, meaning 3 separate event names. That's really where we can leverage event parameters. So instead of having 3 separate names for those events there, just use generate lead for all 3, then use the event parameters to go ahead and to segment which conversion drove of the 100 leads, which did they come from. And that's really just taking an overarching unified approach for everything instead of trying to set up unique conversions or unique events for every single action. Yeah, and at a high level, that pretty much covers it on my end. Justin and team, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
I thought that was good.
Yeah, and actually this probably will go really well into our next question. So can you guys talk a little bit about GTM and how it integrates with Google Ads and GA4?
Sure, I'm happy to keep rolling.
Yeah, let's do it, Steve. I'll tell you.
That's why we brought you here, Steve.
Yeah.
So full caveat, I am very biased because I work extensively within GTM. I recommend that if you need a really robust implementation to go the GTM route, a couple of the reasons why I like it, well, before I get into that, just in terms of how GTM integrates and how it functions, just think of GTM ultimately as like a middleman or a medium that is going to go ahead. You have the data that is coming in from the web property. You are categorizing it. You are creating triggers. You are creating variables for what values you want to capture. And then it's essentially acting as an air traffic controller to send it out to the desired locations. So a good example of why I always say I like using GTM is, let's say you have that, we'll just keep rolling with the generate lead example. I know I want to go ahead and have that trigger whenever someone completes a form. So that's being created within GTM. I need to send that to GA4 as we're talking through here. And yes, we may be able to, within the Google stack, utilize that GA4 conversion and import that into Google Ads. However, what if you're running Facebook? What if you're running Microsoft? See, I almost said Bing. If you're running Microsoft ads, you ideally, even though they're going to be using different attribution models, you really want to be able to ensure that you're tracking them the same way under the same conditions. And that's really where GTM can come into play, where it's going to be the same trigger that's then just sending it off to the different locations.
And Steve, I'm sorry, let me interrupt for a second. And thank you for that setup. 2 things. Number one, you know, I think this comes down to what John was talking about before, and John, you may want to jump in here, but around like if you're, depending on what your needs are for data insights, if you go the route of something like a Monster Insights, that's where you would not be using GTM as part of that as well. And John can talk more about that. If you're going to want to get the data and more of a robust setup, that's where we want to leverage GTM, just because we've seen situations where I'm thinking of one client in particular. It was this nasty Frankenstein mess of over the last 5+ years of people coding certain information on the website, some information on GTM, a lot of different cooks in the kitchen, and there was no high level general understanding or everybody using things in the same way. So just trying to get the data in a consistent way that made sense, there is a lot of unpacking that needs to be done. So if you are going to go the GTM route versus a plugin route, then I think it's really important that you do everything through GTM. It'll make your life a ton easier. But John, I don't know if there's more you want to jump in on that side.
Oh, I would agree as well. And it is a slightly separate conversation because I would definitely say GTM is a best practice and gives you the most capabilities. And I understand your points with configurations, et cetera. It definitely makes sense. The plugin part, just so everyone knows, is just another interface that shows you some of the data. So I would agree from a GT for your, like, I have the code, like, where do I put it? Do I put it through GTM and then get that in the GTM snippet on my site, or do I just put the snippet from GA4 straight onto my site? I would not recommend doing that, but what you can do is you use GTM, put your info in there, then you put the snippet that pulls the GTM on WordPress, and then if you are interested, you could have a lightweight interface on top. It's talking straight to the tracking code. It's no longer, you know what I mean? It's talking straight to Google, so to speak. And it's just a lightweight interface for your user, so they don't personally have to go into the full GA4 interface. Sorry if that was a little confusing, but those are kind of the three moving parts. I would agree, manage your stuff in GTM. You're still gonna have to put a little snippet on WordPress because it, you know, needs to make the connection there. And then if you would like to use a lightweight interface, you know, plugin, Monster or otherwise, you could take advantage of that too.
Yeah, that's great. I do. So, okay, one of the questions that we received was not a question so much as more of a category. So I'm going to jump over to this because I know a lot of the WooRank audience, a lot are going to be small businesses with a focus on e-commerce. So can you guys talk a little bit about where this fits in with GA4 here?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in just with calling out that we probably could do an entire webinar just on e-commerce tracking. So I'll try to address one particular case. So if there is anyone that's using WooCommerce for WordPress, and this is actually a good example of where you can, to John's point, utilize a plugin, and it's something that we actually recommend for WooCommerce sites. So there's a plugin that is GTM, the number 4 WP. And if you're using WooCommerce, what it'll actually do is it will push all of the events, all of the item information, all of the variables you need for your e-commerce tracking to the data layer. So then you can capture that within GTM. So if you're going through some issues of, hey, I need e-commerce tracking, not just for WordPress, or for GA4, but I also need to leverage it for my advertising and your WooCommerce, I'd highly recommend looking at that because it's a relatively straightforward solve. Unfortunately, depending on what your e-commerce platform, there's going to be a different answer for every single one of them. The one thing I would say is, regardless of which platform you're going to use, if you are going through GTM and you have to configure within Google Tag Manager, definitely rely on Google has very good documentation because everything needs to be named within the data layer and within the events in a certain way. Using snake case, for example. The other piece on that I would really say is if you are looking for another expert, there is someone by the name of Simo Ahava that I highly, highly recommend. If you just search GA4 e-commerce, he has a really robust guide that will walk you through all of it.
I love it. Yeah. And again, for anyone who's curious, all of these like really helpful resources we will be compiling because I know you're getting a lot of information thrown at you. So thank you for that. Anytime there's, plugins or, any resources that we can give you guys, we'll at least have a nice list at the end here. So this is a little bit more of an involved question. And Jeremy, I might throw this one to you because I know this overlaps a lot with what you're doing with WooRank. But is it worth trying to build custom report explorations in GA4, or would you push everything to Data Studio and customize the reports? Which approach would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny listening to everybody and how technical GA4 is. I mean, we should take a step back and say for viewers who are a little overwhelmed with how technical this is, it's true. Universal, you could literally just drop, into your website, and you had dozens of canned reports in there. They were it was almost just, like load it, go in there, and I don't really have to think about anything. I've got all these reports and all this data. And as you can tell, GA4 is not like that at all. In fact, Justin literally laid out, going all the way back to the beginning, of take this opportunity to actually look at, what are you actually trying to track, and then let's actually use GA4 as a tool to do that. That has begged the question a lot of like, well, I mean, gosh, is this too much for me? And just to put it out there, we've been on webinars before where folks have recommended maybe you don't just look at GA4. Adobe Analytics is out there. Matomo is an open source platform out there. We've kind of talked about in the WordPress world, you have options, but outside of that, there are other options. But specifically to this question, I also want to frame up the fact within this question, you got to understand that GA4 now very easily integrates to BigQuery, so you could send your data out to a data repository. And you can also integrate very easily with Google Data Studio, which is, technically a BI tool, right? Where you can better visualize your data. Again, very technical stuff here. If you are a small business just looking to look at some metrics on your website, you're thinking to yourself, I have to set up GA4, integrate it to a data repository, and then visualize the data. No, you don't have to do all of that. But this conversation with everybody here, if you want to get this technical, you can set up GA4 and it can be everything you want. I think this question really asks, what is the benefit of pushing this data out? And we've seen a few. And to give a selfish plug for WooRank, we have one use case where we have customers who all need Google Analytics data, but they also need our data from WooRank, right? Because WooRank is telling you what are the SEO best practices that you're doing right, and what could you improve on your website. And so in that kind of situation, Google Data Studio is perfect because we can actually send GA4 data out to it, and we can send our own data out to it, and any other data too. You could connect to your POS data, your CRM data, and you can actually bring all that into something like a Google Data Studio, and then start visualizing and building reports that are layering all these different data sets in so that you can go even deeper. So from that standpoint, I mean, to very simply say, you can absolutely use just GA4, get in there, structure it as best you can. If you want to actually kind of try to structure it similar to how you had UA, you can build those reports. But if you want to go deeper and you especially want to layer in other data, GA4 is set up pretty nicely to integrate very easily with Data Studio.
That's great. Yeah. The one other thing, and again, you guys are just teeing up these questions perfectly, but I want to jump over to one other thing, SEO. I know this overlaps a ton with what we're doing in WooRank, but this was a question that we did receive, SEO and what will change. If Jeremy or Steve or anyone else wants to tackle this one, that would be great. Not all at once, guys.
Just jumping in, I think it was, Jeremy did a good job talking about this at the beginning. I'm not expecting wholesale changes to SEO based on GA4, right? This is a separate product. It's a measurement product. Now, having said that, Google's keenly interested in user experience. So they want to see how people are using the websites, and they factor that into their rankings. Because GA4 measures things in a different way than Universal Analytics did, that's going to give Google some extra insights into being able to see what is happening. But it feels a little too early to kind of answer the question of how that's going to be. I don't expect any major changes in the beginning, though. From this is just personal opinion.
Got it. All right. And because we are getting pretty close to time here, I do want to take a minute. We've been getting some fantastic questions in the comments. So I'm going to throw one up on the screen. Let's see, on about data capture disruption. So let's see. All right. Let me just reformat this so we can read it. That'll do. Okay, so anything on data capture disruptions, for instance, a subdomain change along with event changes, third-party integrations, and can it capture e-commerce transactions? This is a current issue. So thank you, Ian, for that question. Does anyone want to tackle this one?
I'll just re-emphasize two thoughts, and some of this is more general strategy. And on the first part, your timer is running out a little bit. And this is where I was just saying before, whether you're using Google Tag Manager or you're kind of putting the tracking codes straight in your WordPress instance, it's not a bad idea. You may want to consider just capturing both for a while. Don't like turn off the UA stuff, although Steve might be like, nah, get rid of that stuff. But just keep it going. So yes, I screwed up. Something's messed up maybe. Although, I mean, if you really screw up, what can you do? You totally screwed up. UA may break, and the same with your new GA4 tracking. So the first point would be like, consider just keeping both going for a while. But then the other one is, and I was kind of joking about, it's in my interest for you to use Parsley, this other analytics tool. And I was joking because I don't care, I don't work there anymore, but it might not be the worst idea. Once again, I would look to Steve and Justin to say, like, there are other tools out there that you can track. But once again, if you're totally breaking whatever is leading to the disruption, I don't know if you're really spreading the risk that way. It kind of just depends on what you're tracking. So I hope it's a little helpful, but maybe the first part is don't put all, don't turn off anything else, especially if you're using UA already, and consider other tracking mechanisms that might not be impacted by your disruption.
Yeah, John, thank you for that. Totally agree with especially the first part of what you talked about, in that it's actually preferable, I think, to run both instances at the same time until UA runs out. So because you're not really comparing apples to apples, or maybe you are, but it's Macintoshes to Granny Smith. So you want to see how those data looks, or the data in both platforms or the both instances look a little bit different, and it'll help you better understand the data that you're getting from GA4. We had huge pressure from us, or we at our company, from our reps at Google, who were really pushing us to get all the GA4 instances set up that we could by July of last year, so that people had a full year worth of data to compare year over year. So yes, definitely, there's, from my perspective, no reason to turn anything off before July 1. In fact, it's going to happen anyway, so there's really nothing you need to do on that front.
And then I know there were some questions on e-commerce, and Steve, you touched on this a little bit. I'm familiar with WooCommerce, of course, and I think in that world, it's more or less plugins could help, but in general, you're talking the same thing. What can happen, of course, with e-commerce is, we use this other tool for the shopping cart and the transaction. It's like, if that was the question, then obviously things become more complicated, because it's no longer being tracked by your tracking code inside of WordPress, and that's more difficult. I think, Steve, you may have some thoughts on this, that in some cases you may be able to include your tag, the GTM code on those other sites, but it's probably tricky and not always possible. But anyway, if it's certainly leaving the site to do the shopping cart and or the actual transaction, if that's what the question was, it does become more tricky.
Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling with mute there. Totally agree, John. The one I hear a lot is Shopify
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah.
So that's one. There are some ways to do workarounds with Shopify specifically. I was actually working on one this morning before this. But it's going to be specific to whatever your setup is and whatever platform you're utilizing. But yeah, that's a great call out that certainly can be a complicating factor.
Steve, are there any tools you'd mention that you'd recommend on that front, like Elevar or anything like that, that just be worth mentioning?
Yep, absolutely. If you have a Shopify site and if you do not want to have to talk to a data nerd like me to get all of this set up, Elevar is an excellent tool. I believe it's paid for, I want to say around $50 a month, but if you're utilizing a Shopify site, really can kind of be the easy button to just hit, do a couple actions and get everything flowing where it needs to go.
I love it. Well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know we got folks, logging in from all over the globe here. So I know it's actually pretty late night for a few of you folks logging in, but I just wanted to just quickly thank you guys. I mean, fantastic presentation. I know a lot of people are nervous about this big change. And when we originally were deciding on, which implementation we were going to talk about, we realized there's a huge portion of our WooRank audience that is using WordPress. So this was just spot on, really helpful content. Again, we will be emailing out the recording to everyone. But really helpful just to go through all of these details. So I just wanted to quickly thank you guys. And then also, we did get some questions about, more technical, how-tos. And if you didn't get a chance to have your question answered, just know we are here as a resource. So Direct Online Marketing here has their own URL set up that you can go to with /WooRank. There's some great, checklists, more webinars. There's also a free GA4 measurement strategy consultation that they're offering. So some really helpful resources here. And then on the WooRank side, we also have our GA4 hub. So, anyone on this webinar is probably pretty familiar with WooRank.com. But if you go over there, head to the GA4 hub, we do have a countdown clock along with all of the recorded webinars that, we've done in this series so far. Those recap blogs are there. And I will say it's been a pretty helpful series. Some of our webinars get really tactical and you get to see demos up close, going step by step through the process. And some are really just answering the question of why is Google doing this to us? So I just wanted to thank you guys for your time and and definitely reach out if anyone on this. Oh, here, let me. There we go. If anyone on this webinar has any other questions, definitely reach out to us. We would love to follow up and address those specific questions that we may not have had a chance to cover in the webinar itself. But with that, any parting words from you guys before we all log off?
I think there was a quick question, Victoria, at the end. I think people were asking about Elementor. So sorry if I missed that, but that's what came out before Gutenberg, and also Bakery Builder. John, just so you know. So any Elementor is the name of it. I would still push for Gutenberg, but they're both good.
All right. Any other here? Let's see if any other questions came in at the very end there. Okay, so
and just on that, the tool that we mentioned a little bit later, John S., you did spell that correctly, is Elevar. But that's, again, specifically for Shopify and some other e-commerce plugins. So that is a little bit different than the Elementor one that John mentioned.
Oh, I thought I didn't see that, Justin. Thank you. I thought it was Elementor was the question. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, thank you for clarifying then. And Samantha, I'm going to put your lovely comment here on the screen.
I think that says it all right there.
I think so. Yeah, I think this kind of gets the whole feel. I know a lot of people are overwhelmed, but yeah, thank you guys for hopping on. I know we're just
thanks,
trying to
everybody.
help folks out here.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks everybody for being on.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.